You have a system for everything. A folder for your emails, a label for your notes, a specific place on your desk where certain things are supposed to live. And yet, at the end of the day, your mind still feels like a room that nobody has cleaned in weeks. That feeling is not a personal failure. It is actually a sign that something specific is happening inside your brain, and it is worth understanding. Most people who feel mentally cluttered assume they are not organized enough. So they add more structure, they buy a new planner, create another color-coded category, or reorganize their files for the third time this month. And somehow, after all of that effort, the mental noise does not go away. If anything, it gets a little louder. This is the part that rarely gets talked about. The act of organizing itself, when done in certain ways, can be a source of cognitive load rather than a release from it. Not because organization is bad, but because of what the brain is actually doing when you try to impose order on your environment. Here's the common explanation most people accept. You feel scattered because things are messy, so tidying up should fix it. That logic makes surface-level sense. A cleaner space does tend to reduce visual distraction, and there is genuine research supporting that. But this explanation does not account for why so many people feel exhausted after organizing, or why the mental clutter often returns within hours of creating a new system. The real explanation involves something called cognitive overhead. Every system you create requires your brain to maintain it. When you label a folder, you are not just storing information, you are also storing a rule. The rule is, this is where this type of thing belongs. And your brain, without being asked, will keep that rule active. It will monitor whether things are following it. It will notice when they are not. Research in cognitive psychology suggests that the brain does not simply file away the structures we create. It continues to process them passively in the background. This is sometimes described as an open loop, a task or system that has been started but not truly resolved. Every unreviewed inbox, every partially maintained routine, every folder you made but rarely use, represents an open loop sitting quietly in working memory. The more systems you have, the more loops you have open. And open loops, even small ones, consume attentional resources. This is not a metaphor. Studies examining mental fatigue and attention suggest that unresolved or partially maintained systems produce measurable cognitive strain, even when the person is not actively thinking about them. Think about how this plays out in an ordinary workday. You have an email folder for things that need follow-up. You have not checked it in 3 days because your inbox keeps filling faster than you can sort it. The folder exists, but it is no longer reflecting reality. Your brain knows this. Even when you are in a meeting or trying to focus on something else, some part of your attention is quietly aware that the system has drifted from what it was supposed to be. Or think about your phone. You have apps sorted into categories, notifications set to specific rhythms, a habit of checking certain things in a certain order. When any part of that structure slips, even slightly, there is a low-level discomfort. Not because the phone is broken, because the mental model you built around it no longer matches what is actually happening. This also applies to physical spaces. A desk that has been organized according to a specific logic feels fine until one thing lands in the wrong place, and then the whole system begins to feel unresolved, not just that one item. The brain is not responding to the disorder itself. It is responding to the gap between the intended structure and the current reality. There is also something worth noting about the act of creating systems in the first place. Research on decision-making and mental effort suggests that designing organizational structures is itself a high-effort cognitive task. You are not just tidying, you are making rules, anticipating future scenarios, and building mental models of how things should behave. That process is genuinely taxing. And when the system you built does not hold, the energy spent creating it feels wasted, which adds its own emotional weight. The uncomfortable realization here is this: more organization does not always mean less mental effort. Sometimes it means more, because now there is more to maintain, more to monitor, and more ways for your mental model of the world to fall out of sync with reality. The brain is not rewarded by the existence of a system. It is only relieved when a system is both functioning and no longer requiring attention. A simple, imperfect approach that you actually follow can sometimes cost your brain less than an elaborate, well-designed system that you have to constantly repair. This is not a judgment about your habits or your discipline. It is simply how attentional resources work. Maintenance has a cost, and that cost is not always obvious until it is already accumulated. It is also worth being clear about what this does not mean. This is not an argument against organization. Structure genuinely helps. External systems do reduce cognitive load when they are working properly, when they match the actual rhythm of your life, and when they require minimal monitoring. The research on environmental design and mental performance is real. A well-matched system, one that fits how you actually work rather than how you think you should work, can free up significant mental space. What this is pointing at is something more specific. It is the gap that opens up when the system you have and the life you are living are not quite aligned. And the reason that gap is so common is that most organizational systems are designed for an idealized version of daily life. One with consistent routines, predictable demands, and time to maintain structure. That version of life is not what most people are actually living. So the mental clutter that so many people feel is not evidence that they are failing to be organized. It may be evidence that they are carrying the weight of systems that no longer fit. Systems that were built with good intentions but that have quietly become another thing to manage rather than a tool for reducing effort. There is something almost relieving about understanding this, not because it solves anything, but because it shifts the question. The problem is not that you are not trying hard enough. The problem is that trying harder in the same direction often makes the load heavier rather than lighter. The brain is not looking for perfection. It is looking for resolution. It wants loops to close. It wants structures that can take care of themselves, or at least that cost less to maintain than they return in clarity. When those conditions are not met, the sense of clutter persists, regardless of how many folders you have created or how many mornings you have spent reorganizing your desk. That is not a flaw in your character. It is just how attention works.